how can you avoid this mistake that I've made so that you don't recreate it in your own business when it comes to your content marketing strategy? There is a difference between repurposing, reposting, and recycling content. When to know and how to validate when it is time for you to take your content marketing strategy to the next level. When does it make sense for you to actually be repurposing and recreating content? Reposting content rarely grows an audience on new platforms. It's not about you doing more. You need to do less but better. If the messaging that you're using right now is doing a poor job of attracting qualified leads and causing people to take action, what makes you think that if you repurpose bad messaging, it's going to somehow miraculously perform better? It won't. The goal for your content is to maintain consistency over a long period of time. The thing about using content marketing to attract quality leads, it's about consistency. Only do this if you care about increasing the quality of leads that apply for your high ticket coaching program. A mistake that I made early on in my business journey is really messing up my content marketing strategy, because what I used to think is that if I wanted to increase the number of leads applying for my coaching program, that meant that I needed to increase the amount of content I was publishing on social media. And because I was working a full-time job in a very demanding role, I thought that that meant I needed to start being more strategic with my content marketing. I needed to be repurposing my content. And what you end up seeing when you come on social media, you go to YouTube, you go to TikTok, or you go to wherever, you see these 30-second reels of people glorifying repurposing content. They say, take one piece of content and turn it into 18 pieces of content, or take one piece of content and take a long form video, make it an email, take a long form video, make it a carousel, take a long form video, make it a reel. And it sounds so simple in theory. What ends up happening, or what ended up happening for me, which really actually hurt my ability to generate better leads, and it hurt my ability to make more sales, is that when I started to try to repurpose content, these are the two issues that I ran into. One, the process to actually repurpose and recreate content was way more convoluted than what I had thought. And it was more convoluted and harder than what these people were making it seem to be when I was watching these YouTube videos or watching people talk about it in reels. Because then I'm like, I have to become a video editor, I have to become a content and copywriter, I have to figure out how to chop up all this content, and it started taking up so much of my time. I ended up spending hours and hours and hours trying to recreate and repurpose content. It drained the energy that I had, and because I was working on a tight capacity constraint, because I was still managing my 9-to-5 job, I started running out of time with doing revenue generating activities because I was so focused on building out this system to repurpose content that it wasn't even working. But eventually I was able to figure out how to repurpose some things, and then the issue that I ran into is that I kept repurposing content, and as I was repurposing that content, it was doing a very poor job of attracting quality leads. I was creating more content, posting more content, but then my quality of leads applying for my program decreased. The number of leads applying to book calls with me and scheduling calls on my calendar went down. And I was like, I did not understand what the issue was. I was creating more content, posting more content, but the quality of the results that I was getting was decreasing. And that's what I want to talk about with you today, is that how can you avoid this mistake that I've made so that you don't recreate it in your own business when it comes to your content marketing strategy. So the first thing that I had to learn is that there is a difference between repurposing, reposting, and recycling content. And that's the part that people leave out when they start glorifying this process of turn one piece of content into 50 pieces of content. There is a difference between repurposing, reposting, and recycling content. And I want to break down those definitions for you. And I also want to break down when to know and how to validate when it is time for you to take your content marketing strategy to the next level. When does it make sense for you to actually be repurposing and recreating content? Because for most of us, and myself included for a long time in my journey, I did not need to do that to increase my results. I needed to do this one thing differently, which I'll tell you about at the end, in order to get the results that I actually wanted to get with the capacity that I had available to execute. So let's break down these three definitions, the difference between repurposing, reposting, and recycling content. First thing is that reposting content means you're sharing the exact piece of content and you're sharing the exact copy of the content across multiple platforms. This is what most people do, and it's very ineffective Because if you're just reposting content, let's say you create an Instagram reel and you edit it here natively in the app and you design that piece of content to align with the culture and the content consumption and the behavior pattern of somebody on Instagram. If you take that exact same 30-second reel and you repurpose it, you're not repurposing, you're just reposting because nothing about it is changing. If you repost that same reel on YouTube Shorts and repost that same reel on Facebook, repost that same reel on TikTok, yes, you've published 3 pieces of content today, but you've reposted the exact same piece of content. And typically speaking, from when I look at my own results and my own content data, when I repost content, it normally performs well on the platform that it was designed to perform well on. And then it just does okay or really doesn't do anything significant when I repost it to the other channels. Reposting content rarely grows an audience on new platforms because the behavior pattern and the content creation process on TikTok, even though they're both still short form videos, the TikTok culture, how people consume content and the content that performs well on TikTok is different than the content that performs well on Instagram, which is different than the content that performs well on YouTube. And same thing for all the other platforms. So when you're just reposting, calibrate your expectations to understand that you're not going to necessarily grow a large audience when you repost content on another platform. It will allow you to maintain relevance on those other platforms, but it's not necessarily going to grow a new audience or increase reach at a significant level when you just repost the content. So that's reposting. You're reposting the exact copy of a piece of content and you're just reposting it on another platform. Then there is repurposing. And that's the term that we hear people talk about all the time, but very rarely do we hear people break down what does it mean to actually repurpose content. Repurposing content means that you are reworking and recreating an existing content and turning it into something new. So repurposing, when done well, actually is very effective. Just most of us don't have the capacity to repurpose on a consistent basis and manage the productional output to make it make sense. And that's where we have to talk about and decide, when does it make sense for you to be doing this? But repurposing content means that you're reworking and recreating a piece of content and turning it into something new before you publish it across platforms. So for example, I'm recording this video right now talking about repurposing and reposting content. So I'm making a long form video right now. If I wanted to repurpose this, what would make sense is I could take the main bullet points from this video and then go re-record a reel. I could go re-record a TikTok. I could go take the concepts of this video and restructure the delivery to turn it into an email. But in order to effectively repurpose, it means that you need to rework and recreate the content. So I am taking the concept of what is talked about in this video, right? For example, but then I need to contextualize the delivery of how I repackage this messaging dependent on the platform that I'm looking to repost it on. So repurposing content takes more effort. It takes more resources. It takes more time. It takes more work. But it can be really, really effective if the messaging that you're looking to repurpose is doing a good job of attracting quality leads. So you know it's like, oh, the messaging of what I'm talking about is effective. Now I need to restructure that so that I can repost it across different platforms and not just repost it, but take that concept out and recreate it into something new. So repurposing content takes more time, it takes more effort, but that's where you see good results, because the biggest thing that we all have to recognize is that social media is an umbrella term, but each of these individual platforms that we are creating content on, they have different behavior pattern, they have a different comment culture on these platforms. Content gets distributed and people engage with content differently on LinkedIn versus Instagram versus Facebook versus YouTube versus TikTok. So you have to make sure that if you actually desire to grow an audience on another platform than what your primary platform is, reposting is not going to do a great job of growing a new audience, but repurposing can do a good job if you know the messaging is aligned and the messaging of what you're talking about is effective. Then you need to recreate the content to fit to the native behavior pattern of how that platform works. The third type of content restructuring that we're talking about here is recycling content. And recycling content is when I'm talking about me posting maybe a carousel on Instagram, and then a year ago it performed really, really well. And now I am reposting and recycling that exact same carousel a year later or 6 months later. And that's just one platform, the context of how the content was published is effective, it works, and you're just recycling the content on the same platform 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later. similar. And those are the three different distinctions between the types of content. When we hear people talk about repurposing and reposting, I want you to understand those distinctions and those differences. So how do you know when it's the right time to start incorporating content repurposing into your marketing strategy? And like I just mentioned, if you actually desire to grow a new audience on another platform, you need to actually repurpose the content, not just repost it. Because reposting is not going to do a good job of building an audience. It will, again, maintain relevancy. You'll be visible on the platform. You'll have content on the platform, but it doesn't mean that it's actually going to perform well. And this is the mistake that I made for many, many years in my business that I had to learn is that, Jay, it's not about you doing more. You need to do less, but better. Instead of creating more content when you're just reposting, which is ineffective, how can you do less but do it better so that if you are repurposing, it means you will take more time. But that extra time that you put in to recreate and rework a piece of messaging, it's going to yield better results. So how do you know what's the right time to start incorporating repurposing content into your strategy? One is when your messaging has actually been validated. And how you validate your messaging is by looking at what is the percentage of qualified leads applying to enroll in your program. If the messaging that you are putting out right now is not doing an effective job of attracting quality leads, do not start repurposing the content and definitely do not start reposting the content. Reason being is it's not about the amount of content that you publish. It's about the quality of the messaging with the content that you put out. So if your messaging is that you're putting out right now, that your messaging that's influencing the type of content you create, the language that you're using in your content, if the messaging that you're using right now is doing a poor job of attracting qualified leads and causing people to take action, what makes you think that if you repurpose bad messaging, it's going to somehow miraculously perform better? It won't. If one piece of messaging is doing a poor job of performance, you don't want to duplicate it 3 different ways and repost it. Now we just have a week worth of content that is ineffectively working. So when you know it's time to start repurposing is when you actually know this messaging is effective. This messaging is validated. This messaging and the way that you validate it is based off the percentage of quality leads that are actually applying for your program. So if you know that you're putting out content and is doing an effective job of attracting quality leads, then that might say, okay, this is good content. We know the messaging is effective. Now, how do we double down and stretch this content, recreate it, and address this type of messaging from different angles of positioning? So that's the first thing that you want to look at. Is my messaging doing an effective job of attracting quality leads? That's the first point of validation that you need before you start repurposing content. The second point of validation is, do you actually have the capacity to execute what we just described as repurposing content without diluting your original content creation efforts? This is the other part that, again, we need to be honest with ourselves about and recognize what is required. Again, if you're repurposing content, that means you are recreating and reworking that piece of content to publish it on a different platform. In order to recreate and rework, that means that you need resources. Either you have to individually spend more time, or you're going to be paying somebody to spend time to rework and recreate this content. And if you don't have the capacity from a cash flow perspective or the capacity from a time perspective to actually execute it well without diluting the original creation process, then it's probably not a good time to repurpose. If you do have the capacity and you have the resources and the messaging is already effectively working to attract quality leads, great. Now this might be a great time to elevate your content marketing strategy. The third thing that you want to pay attention to know if it's time to start repurposing content is, do you have the systems and the team support that you will need to be able to sustain this deliverable, to sustain this type of content repurposing, and to sustain this level of marketing strategy? Because doing it one time, the goal for your content is to maintain consistency over a long period of time. So if you're like, I want to start repurposing, and you're like, my messaging works, I have the capacity, it's like, now can you sustain it? Do you have the systems and the structure and the team support in order to sustain that type of deliverable? And if you cannot do it for 3 months, don't start it. Don't start. Don't make the decision to actually start investing in reworking and recreating content so that you can repurpose it until you know that you can sustain it for at least 3 months. Because the thing about using content marketing to attract quality leads, it's about consistency. It's consistency in a few categories. Consistency in the frequency at which you publish, consistency with the repetition of messaging that is effective and validated, and consistency with maintaining that cadence between the amount of output that you're putting out, the alignment of your messaging, and the quality of the content production. Those are the three things that we have to be paying attention to. So you don't want to embark on this new journey if you don't actually have the ability to sustain it over an extended period of time so that you can actually yield the results that you're looking to get from it. So I really hope that this helps you calibrate your content marketing strategy and give yourself permission to just honor the season that you are in and understand what these things mean. There's no point in you repurposing content if the messaging is not doing an effective job of attracting quality leads. There's no point in reposting content if your goal is to grow a new audience on another platform. You have to rework and recreate. That's 9 times out of 10, that's what's required. There are some exceptions. Like for example, for me, I take my long form live videos and those get turned into podcast episodes on the Jerisha Said podcast. But because I've published over 200 podcast episodes at this point, I've done over 1,000 live stream videos at this point. When I take my content, my live stream, and repurpose it into a podcast episode, I'm very intentional when I record live videos because I now know where they're going to be distributed. And because I know where they're going to be distributed, I can be conscious about how I created originally. And if you want more information about that, like leave a comment below and I can do another video about how to be intentional when you know you're going to be repurposing content, how to keep where you're going to be reposting this content in mind when you create it originally, because that takes some practice and some skill set development. But either way it goes, those are some things that you really want to be paying attention to. And if you're in a season right now where you're like, my messaging is not yet validated, I needed my messaging to be better when it comes to attracting qualified leads, or maybe you don't have the capacity to actually execute a repurposing strategy, or you don't have the systems and team yet to really support that, I want you to give yourself permission to do less, but do it better. Get consistent at the basics. Have mastery around the basics. Too often, too many of us are trying to do advanced strategies when our foundation is rocky. We're trying to add complexity into our content marketing strategy when we have not nailed the basics. Most people think I need to do more, I need to make more. What I want you to invite yourself into is, how do I do less and do the basics better? Do the basics better. So that might mean maybe you need to post content every day, but instead of you spending hours trying to recreate, repurpose, build out this entire system, just go live. Go live on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you are, and just practice learning how to articulate your value. Whatever messaging topic you want to validate, practice it through a live video. Practice it through a written carousel. Like, practice it through the original form of content creation versus thinking that you need to add all these complex layers on. So that's my invitation to you, is focus on doing less, but doing it better, and focus on getting better at the basics, and honor the season that you are in. Be mindful of when you are trying to add complexity to a strategy. If you don't have the capacity, the resources, and most importantly, if you have not yet validated that the messaging is doing an effective job of attracting quality leads, you don't need to be doing all this other stuff. You don't need to be doing all this other stuff. So I encourage you to just to honor the season that you are in. Give yourself permission to focus on what you need to focus on for where you are at right now so that you can yield better results from your content marketing strategy. Too many people think they need a new strategy. You don't need a new strategy. You just need to get better at the basics of the strategy that you're currently using. If you like the video you just watched, click this one. You might like it even more. Go ahead, check it out.